say that my kingdom does not belong to this world, we can perhaps have the impression that Jesus is sort of distancing himself from the world and sort of saying that, the day-to-day sort of operations in the world, or the political things, or the ways that nations are governed, the ways that countries are set up and these kingdoms, it doesn't matter. My kingdom doesn't belong to this world. And I think instead what we ought to recognize is that when Christ is saying that my kingdom does not belong to this world, he's saying it does not originate here. It is not something that the world has given to me. My kingdom does not belong to this world in the sense that it is not something that originates out of this world. It originates, Christ's kingdom originates from his Father. Christ then is not distancing himself from our day-to-day things. He's not saying, hey, whatever happens in the world doesn't really matter because it's not my kingdom. He's not doing that at all. I think what he's saying is, I am a king whose kingdom does not originate in this world, but from my Father, and I desire that my kingdom be part of this world. He's saying that my kingdom, Christ's kingdom, is a kingdom that needs to have influence and make its way into the day-to-day things of our lives, the ways that our politics take place, the ways that our nations are governed. Christ's kingdom is one that needs to be embraced by the day-to-day operations of our world and our lives. Far from distancing himself, he's saying, it starts with my Father, but it needs to and must, if things want to go well, it must overflow and spill into also the kingdoms of this world, even though it doesn't originate in this world. The origin of this feast of Christ the King that we celebrate is one that it took place, it was founded in 1925 by Pope Pius XI. And he said in there, we need to establish a festival, a celebration of Christ the King. He said, and interestingly enough, which I love, he said, we best remember things when we celebrate them. And so we celebrate and we establish this celebration of Christ's kingship over our lives in heaven and on earth, even though, of course, it originates in heaven. And Pope Pius XI, when he established this feast, he wrote a letter about Christ the King. And he said something, and I'd just like to read this to you, kind of reflect a little bit on it because I think it's very beautiful. He says, the evils in the world are due to the fact that the majority of men have thrust Christ and his holy law out of their lives. The evil in the world is there because people have thrown Christ out of their lives. He is not the king. These had no place either in private affairs or in politics. And as long as individuals and states refuse to submit to the rule of our Savior, there is no really hopeful prospect of a lasting peace among nations. Mankind must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. What was happening, of course, in that era was that people had begun to say, we don't need God in our day-to-day lives. We can be a secular people and still find peace, doing it some way other than the way that Christ is asking us to live our lives and run our countries and organize our societies. Let's do it another way. And we will still find peace. And Pope Pius, in this establishing of this, says, you will not find peace outside of trying to anything other that is outside the kingdom of Christ. If you try to establish your own kingdom that is not submitted to the way that Christ is asking us to structure our societies, our communities, our lives, Pope Pius is saying, as the church has always said, it won't work. Things will break down. And Pope Pius would have known in 1925 what happened. They're coming off of the end of the First World War. And all the time we hear, right, in our society, we hear people criticizing, all the wars of the world have started because of religion, and religion's always the problem, and religion's so bad. Well, World War I was started and battled by secular countries, people that had kicked Christ out. Look what happens when you do that. Pope Pius XI would have known very intimately and been able to speak very proficiently about, look, this is what happens when Christ is removed from the way that societies, nations, communities are set up and run. This is what happens, World War I. And they didn't learn their lesson in World War II. The same thing. It wasn't religion that caused World War I. It wasn't people waving the banner of Christ around that started World War I. It was a bunch of people who had kicked Christ out of their country and said, we don't want that. And we see the madness that follows, and Pope Pius is commenting on that and saying, there is no hopeful prospect of peace unless it is in the kingdom of Christ. That's a very powerful thing. Again, we can read this letter from Pope Pius. We can read it, I think, in two ways. We could say, well, he's really just sitting on top of his throne in Rome, and he's really lamenting the fact that not everybody does what he says anymore. He's just, you guys need to all get back under me and follow me as the Pope, and we need the old way where everybody did what I wanted everybody to do, and where countries were, and there was the Holy Roman Empire, and it was glorious, and everyone was Catholic. That's what that he's just kind of trying to. But again, you can also read it and recognize that no, in fact, what he's saying is madness ensues, and I know it because we've just seen it. Madness ensues when you remove Christ from your nation. Madness ensues when you remove Christ from your community and from your lives. A couple of comments, and how do we establish the kingdom of Christ? What was this talking about? In the old days, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, France was Catholic, Germany was Protestant, you had all these, everybody was under a flag. Is that what we're talking about? Are we supposed to, as America, as the United States, as Brazil, Indiana, supposed to raise a Catholic flag again? Over the stars and stripes? Are we supposed to become this where everyone is going to church every Sunday and that's what it means, and you're forced to go, and everyone pays taxes to the church, and Father lives in a mansion and all that sort of thing? That's not what the church is talking about. When we talk about Christ the King, we're not talking about going back. We know, everyone knows that most likely won't happen. And it doesn't, in fact, it doesn't need to happen in order for the kingdom of Christ to come back into our lives and to come back into our existence and to our shared experience as a nation. There are two quotes that I think are really important to share that I always think of when I'm reflecting on this topic. One was from John Paul II, and he said, the church doesn't impose, she proposes. The church doesn't impose, she proposes. So it's not that Pope Francis, when he came to America, said, President Obama, you need to get back under me. You need to be under my rule. That's the only way that things are going to work out well. You need to get back in line, or the United States needs to get back in line and again, follow me and do whatever I tell you. I need to be the president. Pope Francis didn't say that. That's not the way that we understand things. And yet, what we do believe is that we propose to people and to our nation and say exactly what Pope Pius XI has said. If you do not work this way, if you do not allow the laws and the teachings of Christ to be a part of your nation, it will break down. It will not go well. On the flip side, if you do allow the teachings and the laws of Christ to flow through your country and be embraced, even without raising the flag of Catholicism or Jesus, your country will thrive. You will experience, as Pope Pius said, lasting peace. And so this is a real challenge for us. Again, it's not a matter of anymore just trying to fight and make us a Catholic country in the sense of, having the Pope on the flag or something like that. We have to do it in the day-to-day action of our lives. It has to be a ground-up thing. It has to start with us. And we have to propose it to our neighbors and to everyone else and work out from there. And say, this is what the kingdom of Christ looks like because I am in the kingdom of Christ, and it is good to be here. And I propose and I invite you to share in that kingdom. Why don't you come live in this place with me? And as we start doing that more and more, that has a ripple effect, and it transforms our country. And so we can become then a kingdom, a place where the kingdom of Christ is present in the fullness of all of its glory. The more and more that we do that, the more and more it spreads. And so our task is to work at it in the ways that we are able to do it from the ground up. Again, not trying to just simply have it be something that happens right at the top and then so we can go around and tell everybody the United States is a Catholic country. We make it a Catholic country starting with our families, starting with our relationships, starting with our marriages, starting with our friendships, starting with our coworkers. And it will become a Catholic country from the inside out if we do it and if we live the way that Christ is asking us to. If we prefer our own comfort, if we prefer to not make any, to not say anything and to just kind of be to ourselves, then the kingdom of Christ will not work its way from the inside out. It will fizzle and die with you or I or us as we choose to be comfortable and simply kind of worry about ourselves. The other quote that I always think of in regards to all of this and the kingdom of Christ in our nation and our cities and our relationships, the church and state are now clearly separated. What's clear is that the church is better off for it. What's not clear is whether the state is. When we look around and we see what happens when we remove Christ from the ways in which we have structured things, and the ways in which our nation is structured, the ways in which our local societies and our communities and our states are structured, if we remove Christ from that, things go badly. We as a church are glad, we're better off for not having to have Father Hollowell be the mayor of Brazil, or Pope Francis be the President of the United States, or the Holy Roman Empire. We're better off for that. We're better off simply working as leaven in the midst of family and friends and communities, working to transform the nation and our societies from the inside out. We pray that we may recognize that Christ is desiring to establish His kingdom each day, every moment, more and more fully from the inside out. And may we be one of the agents of change to help bring about that kingdom more fully in our midst and in our community and our nation this day.